I really want to talk about this. This article has recently come to my attention, and it's really shocking, and I don't know why anyone's talking about this. Right, Sudan on precipice of famine beyond imagination, says outgoing UNA chief. So man-made crisis in Gaza and Sudan, leaving millions of people at risk, says retiring British diplomat Martin Griffiths. So this is mainly about Sudan, but Gaza as well, what we already know about. Sudan is facing horror beyond imagination, the outgoing UNA chief has warned, with 750,000 people under imminent threat of famine and with conditions in danger of worsening even further. So its risk is really bad there. British diplomat Martin Griffiths will retire from his job as the UN's Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs at a time when famine on a historic scale is looming over Sudan and Gaza. Griffiths told The Guardian that while Gaza is a subject of intense media coverage, well, if you watch Al Jazeera, mainly, and diplomatic effort, albeit unsuccessful so far, another potentially much larger human-made tragedy is unfolding in Sudan, largely out of the world's sight and with little sign of diplomatic progress. Statistics published on Tuesday by the Integrated Food excuse me by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) show that 495,000 Palestinians in Gaza face catastrophic conditions defined as an extreme lack of food, starvation, and exhaustion of coping capacities over the coming 6 months. It's probably a lot more than that. Over the same period, the panel of experts estimated that 755,262 people in Sudan face the same Phase 5 catastrophic conditions, well, whatever that means, while a further 8.5 million Sudanese face a Phase 4 emergency, defined as a state where acute malnutrition and disease levels are excessively high and the risk of hunger-related death is rapidly increasing. It's millions, it's really bad, and apparently no media is talking about this. These are staggering numbers. It's beyond imagination, said Griffiths, a British diplomat. I think historically it is a huge moment. He agreed with estimates by top US officials that without a change of course in terms of access for humanitarian relief and international donations, the outcome in Sudan could be even worse than the historic famine in Ethiopia, which killed 1 million people between 1983 and 1985, according to UN estimates. Oh, yeah, we know most of that from Band Aid and all that. Sudan is comparable in horror, in potential tragedy, if not worse. But it's not moving in the right direction, and it's not getting international attention on the level it should, Griffith said. Why not? It should, if it's this bad. There was massive international attention on the Ethiopian famine and massive generosity, yet, like with Band Aid, what we were saying. Whereas in Sudan, partly because journalists aren't given visas to get to places, it's very difficult to get the story out. They should. The 2024 Sudan Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, launched at the end of last year, asked for $2.7 billion to address the crisis in Sudan. But as of this week, it was less than 17% funded. Shocking. Griffiths said that it is about the average global response rate for humanitarian appeals around the world. Tragically, it's not that unusual these days, he said. It's partly because the needs have grown, but the funding hasn't. The knowledge hasn't grown either, because obviously a lot of people don't know about it. The two rival generals during the civil war, Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAS, and the country's de facto ruler, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, hope I said that right, the head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, have shrugged off mediation efforts, and both sides are blocking access to food and other humanitarian aid. Yeah, we shouldn't block aid. It's important. Crucially, for the Darfur region in Western Sudan, the centre of a looming famine, the SAF is not letting aid across the Addo crossing from Chad. Why not? Griffiths said diplomatic efforts were underway to try to resolve a blockage, perhaps with an inspection regime to guarantee that arms were not entering Sudan alongside food aid. Yeah. Or just arms but no food. But he said that time was running out to avoid the worst case scenarios. So why letting it get that way? The worry is that we are not going to get the seeds in to do the planting season, and it's going to get worse, he says. Yeah. And they're still blocking the aid. It's disgraceful, just like what Israel is doing to Gaza. And speaking of which, in Gaza, Griffiths noted that the numbers of Palestinians facing catastrophic famine has halved since March, when those at risk numbered more than 1 million people, but he also warned that the improvement could be short-lived. Yeah, Israel keeps bombing them, that's why. It's disgraceful. He said, I suspect the reason for the improvement is because we did get in some quantities of humanitarian assistance in the months of March and April. So aid works, is the story here. People can be rescued from famine and starvation and disease if aid is made available. So why isn't it made available? And actually can be rescued quite quickly from the abyss, excuse me. Oh, sorry, I thought I had some Fortuna. Since the limited opening of crossings into Gaza in early spring, however, Israel has launched an offensive on Rafah, the southernmost city in the coastal strip. That sent more than 1 million people fleeing into a no man's land in central Gaza, closed the main access point for aid, the Rafah crossing, and accelerated the spread of gang violence and insecurity, which has emerged as the biggest obstacle to distributing food. We have now gone down to practically nothing, Griffith said. Disgraceful. He added that although criminality and mob looting had become major problems inside Gaza, it did not absolve Israel, of course it didn't, of responsibility as the occupying power. Well, of course it doesn't absolve them. They're guilty, guilty, guilty. The Israelis have an obligation under international laws to provide a security of humanitarian aid, but they don't, do they? So it's not right to say they're not the problem. No, they are the problem, Griffith said. They are part of a process that is needed to ensure the security of humanitarian deliveries. He said UN aid convoys would never ask for Israeli military escorts, but he said that there are other things Israel could do. Well, of course, Israel aren't interested in escorts. We're more interested in just bombing everywhere. Why ask them for help? They're the enemy. He pointed out that a de-confliction centre has still not been set up to bring aid organisations and the Israeli military together to ensure convoys are not bombed. Yeah, right. The creation of such a centre was one of promises made by Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, to Joe Biden in a phone call in April. It never quite happened, he said, adding, we're not asking for anything out of turn, we're asking for standard things that we ask of parties in conflict situations anyway. It's not rocket science, but it needs to be done. A US official confirmed that the absence of a de-confliction centre was the biggest obstacle to distributing aid inside Gaza. So why isn't there one then? The looting as well as the recent violence is a factor. But overall, I think the bigger concern for us is getting these movements coordinated in a way that the UN can function more effectively, the official said. The Israelis haven't come through on that promise yet. Well, of course they haven't. To improve internal security within Gaza, Griffiths also advocated talks with the leaders of the region's big clans who become more powerful with the collapse of the Hamas-run government. Are you sure it's collapsed? It has to be part of the puzzle, he said, adding that the big families need to be consulted to make sure that we understand the dynamics of the communities and what's happening in these places. Yeah, so a lot with Gaza. And Sudan was apparently much worse than Ethiopia, or it's getting that way, and no one's talking about it. Well, they are now with this article. This article needs to be more widespread than all the media. And speaking of, it is coming to the 40th anniversary of Band Aid, so whether they do something for this, I don't know. Anyway, that's the news for today from this event. So there you go.